Hello, folks. My name is Amira Armond. I'm the president of Kieri Solutions. I'm a CMMC provisional assessor, CMMC provisional instructor. I have passed the certified CMMC assessor exam, which is about as good as you can get for the assessment side of CMMC. And this is part 3 of a series because I got asked on LinkedIn about whether I had a video about gap analysis in relation to the assessment scoping process. And I was a little bit confused by that. So we've talked about, in the first video, I talked about the formal assessments. In the second video, I talked about pre-assessment, mock assessment, and gap analysis. And in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the, let's say, formal assessment process to include scoping and readiness review, which I think is what the question was about, the original question. So when you ask for a formal CMMC assessment or a formal 800-171 assessment or a mock assessment or a pre-assessment, not a gap analysis necessarily, but one of those high confidence assessments where you've got a full assessment team, you're going through the full process, you're trying to come up with the same results that a real assessment would come up with. When you're going through one of those major assessments, even if it's a pre-assessment or a mock, you're going to go through a planning stage with your lead assessor. And that planning stage is going to include scoping. So when you first start talking to the sales team or the C3PAO, they will probably ask you questions about how complex is your environment? Do you have manufacturing stuff? Do you have development systems? Do you just do, Microsoft Office and spreadsheets and web browsing, or do you do more complex things with your computers? And the reason why they ask all that, how many facilities do you have? How many users do you have? The reason why they ask you that is because complexity drives the cost of assessment. If you have a very simple system, which might be like all MacBooks, right? Just all your users have MacBooks and all they do is they use their web browser to do work. That's a very easy assessment compared to a more complex company that might have Windows computers, MacBooks, servers, cell phones, tablets, manufacturing devices, Linux servers, network equipment, printers, scanners, right? Maybe a dev lab. So that second example with all that complexity is a very difficult assessment because you have to have assessors who are capable of understanding the technology. You have to get evidence showing that each of those different types of systems are secured, which could quadruple or more the amount of assessment time and effort involved, right? So if you're assessing a company that just has MacBooks, that might be one assessor for 2 days to go through all the evidence and all the requirements for the MacBooks and the users. If you've got a very complex environment, that might take 4 or 5 assessors a week or 2 weeks to go through all those different aspects of the environment, right? Huge difference in effort. So when you were going through the pre-sales process, where they're trying to figure out how much to quote you for an assessment, they probably asked you about complexity. And then they gave you a quote, and you said, that sounds good. And then you entered into the planning phase. Now, the planning phase is where we actually verify that the complexity is correct and that you have done a good job of preventing your CUI, your controlled and classified information, from leaving that scope, that area that you said you want to have assessed. So if you do not have good boundaries to prevent the movement of information out of your assigned area, that's a big problem. That can cause the assessment to fail. It can cause the assessment to be canceled. Or it could cause the assessment scope to be expanded, where suddenly we go from needing 1 or 2 assessors to needing 4 assessors, which is a big deal from the assessment team's perspective. And it's probably a big deal from your perspective, because instead of reserving time for everyone for a couple days, now you have to reserve time for more days. And also, if the C3PAO has structured things correctly, you would have to pay for those additional assessors, right? This costs money. So the scoping process verifies that what we thought was correct is actually correct, that we have the right people involved, and it also checks to see whether you're ready for assessment, right? So if those boundaries are not good, that means that you're not ready for assessment. As part of that readiness review, which is the term, okay, so I think that original question on LinkedIn was asking about a readiness review, not a gap analysis. As part of the readiness review, not just the scope and the boundaries are reviewed, but also your general documentation and data flows. So the readiness review will ask for network diagrams, data flow diagrams, that's data flows for your CUI, how it comes into your network, how it moves around inside your network, how it leaves your network, right? Do you know how that happens? Do you have assigned routes and methods for the CUI to move? It's going to ask for your system security plan, right? Which should be a pretty complex document that talks about how you're doing every single one of the requirements. And the lead assessor who's doing the scoping with you, they're going to read through that system security plan. They might read 300 pages or more of system security plan to make sure that when you have addressed each requirement, you understood what the requirement actually was asking for, and that you implement a solution that is appropriate to those items. So the assessor is not looking for evidence. They're not going to say, hey, it says here that the way you do this is by implementing a firewall rule. I need to see that firewall rule. They're not going to ask for that. They're just going to read what you wrote in the SSP, the system security plan, that says the way we do this is by implementing a firewall rule. And they'll go, that's reasonable, right? That's pretty normal for this requirement. That sounds good. Or if they read something that's off the wall, like maybe the requirement that says you will do a self-assessment of the controls periodically, and your answer is, I perform a vulnerability scan, which is not the same thing, but it's a common misunderstanding. That assessor is going to go, uh-oh, this is a problem, right? They did not understand this requirement. it is written in the SSP as the wrong implementation. This is incorrect. And I can expect that they're going to fail this requirement if I actually assess them in the future. And depending on the severity of that failure, right, maybe that is a very important requirement, which is not allowed to be put on a plan of action, right? You're not allowed to fail it and still get a CMMC certificate. If that's the situation, your lead assessor will probably say, whoa, 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 you got a problem. We should not assess you right now because this is a guaranteed failure, the way that you have implemented this requirement. Go figure out what you're doing and come back in a couple months. Right? So that is a readiness review process, which is typically performed during the planning stage of a real assessment, a formal assessment. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to do a quick review, right? An efficient review, which hopefully takes less than 10 hours, to make sure that the company has done the requirements well enough to have a good shot at passing their assessment. And to stop assessments from occurring if you know that the company is going to fail hard, which is a kindness to everyone. All right. So that is how my company, Kieri Solutions, approaches the planning stage for real assessments. I can't say that's how every C3PAO does it, but that's how we do it. We try to make sure that our clients are ready before we start a process that costs dozens of thousands of dollars. So I think that's what the original question was, is the readiness review process, right? Which is typically part of scoping, and it doesn't actually review evidence. It doesn't do an interview. It doesn't test your systems. It's a review of key critical documents, which are your network diagrams, your data flows, your system security plan, and I didn't mention it, but also your inventories. So your software inventory, your cloud inventory, your hardware inventory, your personnel inventory, to make sure that you know what you have in your environment. I hope that helps. Thank you.